The following program, Search the Scriptures, is brought to you by the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. Speakers are Keith Sharp and Trevor Campbell. We invite you to call or write the church to submit questions for the speakers to answer. We'll provide answers from the Bible to your questions.
Well, Trevor, we have another question this evening concerning the Sabbath. This is the second time that we've been asked about the Sabbath. So are you ready to deal with the Sabbath this evening?
Sounds good to me.
All right, sounds great. Good evening, I'm Keith Sharp. I'm going to let Trevor introduce himself and the congregation at Payette.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Trevor Campbell, and I worship and preach at the Payette Church of Christ, located on Highway 62 in Payette. And you'll see us as you're coming through on the highway there on the north side, next to the tractor dealership, and you see our phone number on the screen there. That's my number. You can call me there if you have any questions for the program or questions about the church there. The number is 870-435-2737, and we meet on Sundays at 10 a.m. for a Bible class and then 10:45 a.m. for a worship service, and invite you to come out to both of those and join us. We'd love to have you.
And I'm Keith Sharp. I preach at the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. We meet 1 mile south of the Highway 62 412 bypass on the way down to Salesville and to Norfolk. We invite you to come out to our services on Sunday morning. We have our Bible classes at 10 o'clock. Sunday morning we have our worship assembly at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. And then we have another worship assembly at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. We have our midweek assembly and Bible study at 7 o'clock Wednesday evening. And remember our ladies' class at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. We invite you to all of these services at the Highway 5 South Church of Christ. And of course, we invite you to give us your question. That's what drives this program, is the questions that we receive from you. And by the way, we're several questions behind, but we'll get to them as we can without giving short shrift to any of the questions. But you can call me, Keith Sharp, at 870-321-5746. Or you can email me at keithsharp@suddenlink.net. Or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654, and we will take your questions and answer them on the air. Well, Trevor, the question is, what day is the Sabbath, Saturday or Sunday? How about starting us out on that, please, sir?
All right. I would start personally in Genesis chapter 2.
All right, go right ahead.
All right. So I'm in Genesis chapter 2 right now. I'm going to read a passage here, beginning at verse 1 of the chapter, where it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done." All right, so this is obviously about the creation and the creation story. At the end of creation, when God finished the heavens and the earth, he rested. And what's interesting about that word, he rested, or that phrase there, it can also be translated Sabbath.
Right.
That's basically the same word, Sabbath, there. So he took Sabbath, or he ceased from his work.
Ceased from labor.
Ceased from labor, and cease is a good word there to use, I think. And that was on the seventh day. So would be our last day of the week.
Okay. All right. Now, the first time that the command to keep the Sabbath is given is in the book of Exodus. No one was ever commanded to keep the Sabbath, nor there are any examples of people keeping the Sabbath before the giving of the law of Moses.
Okay, good point.
And in Exodus chapter 16, as Israel is journeying out away from Egypt and toward Mount Sinai to receive the law, then they received the command that they were to pick up the manna from the ground 6 days a week, but not on the Sabbath day. And this is the first time that the Sabbath command is given.
Okay.
Then it is formally incorporated into the law of Moses. You want to take that in Exodus chapter 20, Trevor, or not?
No, you go ahead.
All right.
That's fine.
In Exodus chapter 20, this is the first formal command that anyone was ever given as a formal part of a law to keep the Sabbath. This is Exodus chapter 20. And notice Trevor's given the background to this in Genesis chapter 2.
Right.
And then look at beginning in verse 8 of Exodus chapter 20. remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Of course, that's the fourth of the 10 commandments of the Mosaic covenant. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days, notice the basis for this, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the Sabbath day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So there's no doubt that the seventh day is the Sabbath day.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, what did Israel do, and what did they remember on the Sabbath day?
Well, they were to remember, well, we can read about it, but they were to remember their deliverance out
All
of
right.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in Exodus 31. And Exodus chapter 31, God talks about this very thing. And as we read this passage, I'm going to start in verse 13, I think, and then read on through to verse probably 17. But, you know, in the passage here, it's interesting that you're going to see how the Lord refers to the Sabbath. It's His Sabbath. It's a holy day. It's a day of remembrance. It's all of these things that were set aside for the Israelites to think about and to observe. So just something to think about as we kind of go through it.
Very good.
In verse 13, he says, "Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. And you shall keep the Sabbath. Therefore, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. For whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people." Just to be clear, the word cut off, or that phrase there, if you do a more in-depth study throughout the Old Testament, it means death penalty.
Right.
Yeah, they die.
So you mean that if the Sabbath is in force
Okay.
and people don't keep it, they are to die.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's
under that
pretty
old
serious,
law.
isn't it? Okay, go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, good point. It is serious. Work shall be done, I'm in 15, for 6 days, but the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations, as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And so we see there the purpose of it. And I actually forgot it in verse 15, the end there. It says, "He'll should be surely be put to death."
Yeah.
I forgot that was there. But, you know, you see the purpose behind it. It's God's Sabbath, but it was for them. It was to be sanctified, the word holy there, to sanctify and set it apart. And then the purpose of it there, it's a sign between He and the children of Israel. You know, He made the earth in 6 days and created the earth and the heavens, and then He rested on that seventh day. But also, it was to remember their deliverance.
All right, so you mean that God gave the Sabbath to the Israelites, to the children of Israel?
Right,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and that was a remembrance of their deliverance?
Yeah. Deuteronomy chapter 10 actually mentions that specifically. Or Deuteronomy chapter 5, I'm sorry. Deuteronomy chapter 5.
Which is the second giving of the Ten
Yeah,
Commandments.
there's the Ten Commandments
right.
again. And I'm a little slow to get there, but if you've got it, you can start reading.
Well, I can start, but I want you to comment when you get there.
Oh, okay.
In Deuteronomy chapter 5, it begins in verse 12, and I think you're there now, Trevor, so I'm going to let you take it.
All right, I made it finally. Verse 12 says, "Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well with you." You know, again, we mentioned earlier on the word Sabbath meaning to cease. Mm-hmm. And you can see that even the animals,
right.
where everything was just to stop.
Right.
And then he's going to go into the next portion here in verse 15. What were they to do? Why were they stopping? It was to take a rest from the daily ritual and routine of life and work, so that they could remember what God had done for them. In verse 15, he says, "And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day.
So why did the Lord command Israel to keep the Sabbath?
Well, it began as he had ceased, so he was kind of set that example, but
Okay.
it was for the purpose of them remembering their deliverance.
Okay.
God delivering them and what he had done for them.
Trevor, were your ancestors delivered from Egyptian bondage?
No, no, I'm not an Israelite.
Oh, right, okay. You know, I used to live up close to the Canadian border. And when I would drive across into Canada on July the 1st, they would be having Canada Day.
Okay,
That was the day that they celebrate their independence from Great Britain.
okay,
Although they're still a part of the British Commonwealth, but they're an independent nation. And July the 4th doesn't mean a thing to a Canadian. July the 1st means nothing to me.
good point.
But I'm an American. July the 4th means something to me. That's our Independence Day. So if you're not a Jew, does the Sabbath have any meaning to you?
No,
Okay, now that's something to think about, isn't it?
yeah, it is.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Trevor, is there more you would like to say about that?
Well, as far as the day of, I think we got that down pretty good. It
All
was
right.
clearly the seventh day, which is the last day.
All right, so Trevor, is that the day that you and the brethren of Piet assemble to worship the Lord on the Sabbath day, on the seventh day of the week?
No.
Well, why not?
Well, it's not commanded in the Scriptures, and it does not carry over into Christ's new covenant.
Okay.
But there is a day that we are to remember, and that's the first day of the week.
All right, well, tell us about that, please.
Yeah, the first day of the week is unique for a number of reasons, but maybe the first significance that we might talk about is just in Luke chapter 24, a good example that is, in Luke chapter 24, because it's the day that Jesus arose from the dead.
All right.
So that's something to remember. In Luke chapter 24, and in verse 1, it says, "Now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they, and certain other women with them," that would be Mary and Mary Magdalene, "came to the tomb, bringing the spices which they had prepared. But they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, and then when they went in, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened as they were greatly perplexed about this, that behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And as they were afraid and bowed their faces to the earth, they said to them, Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen."
All right.
So Jesus arose on the first day of the week.
Okay. And I'm going to add a passage to that will go along with what Trevor's already just said there in Luke chapter 24. In Mark chapter 16, verse 9, Mark's parallel account to Luke chapter 24. This is Mark chapter 16, verse 9. Mark just says, "Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons." So it's a very specific statement.
That's real
Jesus
specific.
rose early
Yeah.
on the first day of the week. Well, does Jesus' resurrection have any consequences for us?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If he didn't rise from the dead, we don't.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so our salvation and our hope of the resurrection from the dead both are dependent on Jesus' resurrection from the dead.
Absolutely.
So what should we remember when we come together as God's people under the New Testament? Should remember Israel's deliverance from Egyptian bondage or Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection?
Right, right.
Okay.
That would be for us. And significant is the first day of the week for sure, and we see that here. But we're also, as you said, remembering the death and burial and the resurrection, remembering Jesus Christ. And that's what the apostles did, and that's the example we have in the New Testament. In fact, in Acts chapter 20 is an example of them coming together to partake of the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper and the purpose behind the Lord's Supper is to remember Jesus Christ. The bread represents his body, and to help us remember his body. The fruit of the vine representing his blood. It says in Acts chapter 20 and verse 7, "On the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread," and it goes on from there to explain what was taking place. But we see right there they came together to break bread. That was their purpose and their goal, kind of like the Israelites. The purpose of ceasing on the Sabbath was to remember that the Lord delivered them. Likewise, in like manner, we come together on the first day of the week. What's the main purpose? What are we really focused on? Well, it should be on Jesus Christ.
All right.
And our deliverance, through his death, burial, resurrection.
All right, very good, Trevor. Well, let's come back to that in just a minute. Let's stop right here and remind people about our services and how to be in touch with us. Trevor, go ahead and tell them about Payette.
Sure, yeah. I worship and preach in Payette there at the Church of Christ, located on the north side of the highway. And if you'd like to call us, you can call me at 870-435-2737. If you have a question about the church there, or any questions for the program that we can answer, try to answer for you using the Bible. And then you'll see the times of worship, 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings for Bible class and 10:45 a.m. for a worship service. And I'd love to see you at both of those. Come out and visit us.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. And of course, we invite you people who live in Mountain Home and the surrounding area to attend the services of the Highway 5 South Church of Christ, 1 mile south of the Highway 62-412 bypass around Mountain Home on the Highway 5 going down towards Salesville and Norfolk. And we meet on Sunday morning for Bible classes at 10 o'clock. We have our worship assemblies at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning and 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. We have our Wednesday evening assembly and Bible study at 7 o'clock. And we have a ladies' Bible class on Wednesday morning for all of you ladies at 10 o'clock. Excellent ladies' Bible class. We invite you out to that. And so you come to those classes and worship assemblies, you will be very welcome. And we want you to be in touch with us also. Let us know what your questions are concerning the Bible. Again, that's what drives this program, the questions that you submit. You can call me, Keith Sharp, at 870-321-5746. Or you can email me, Keith Sharp, at suddenlink.net. Or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. Okay, Trevor, we're talking about the Sabbath, and then when Christians under the New Testament come together to worship the Lord. And you were talking about the fact that we don't remember Israel's deliverance from Egyptian bondage when we come together to worship the Lord. We remember what Jesus did for us.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that the disciples, Acts 20, verse 7, came together on the first day of the week to break bread. Well, what was the purpose of that breaking bread?
Okay, yeah, I made mention of that being the Lord's Supper, which I think a lot of folks are probably familiar. There's the Lord's Supper takes place on the first day of the week, or churches come together and they partake of the Lord's Supper. But yeah, there is a more of an explanation of that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. This is the Apostle Paul here, and I'm going to bounce around just a little bit just to kind of to show you what's going on in the context. In verse 18, he says of chapter 11, he says, "For first of all, when you come together as a church." So in the context, he's dealing with the people assembling together, coming together as a church. One of the things they were to do is to partake of the Lord's Supper. And coming down here to verse 23, verse 21, he actually mentions, or 20, excuse me, he mentions the Lord's Supper. But in verse 23, he says, "For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes.'" And so that's what's going on. And I believe that's what Acts chapter 20, which we read earlier, was talking about. They were coming together on the first day of the week, with this purpose in mind, to partake of this Lord's Supper. Yeah.
Yes, in fact, to go along with what you're saying, I obviously agree with you. That in this very context, they had been coming together as the church to eat a common meal.
Right.
And the Apostle Paul rebukes them for that.
Yeah.
And of course, he also rebukes the fact that they were being selfish in the way that they ate those common meals. But he rebukes their coming together. Notice he says in verse 22, "What? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I do not praise you." And then skip down to the end of the chapter in verse 34, and he says, "But if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, lest you come together for judgment, and the rest I will set in order when I come." So when we come together as the church, the meal that we eat is
It's the Lord's Supper.
The Lord's Supper. And
not
why
a
do we
common.
eat that meal?
To remember the Lord's death and
Okay.
remember Him.
And
Yeah,
so if
yeah.
we're hungry, do we come together as the church to eat a common meal?
No.
No, that's not what we do as the church. Okay.
Right. Good point.
Well, we can get together if we want to, but we don't do that as the church.
Right.
And so on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Acts 20, verse 7, was it to eat a common meal or to eat the Lord's Supper?
Well, yeah, the text makes it clear. It was for the Lord's Supper, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
definitely.
Okay, so we do that on the first day of the week,
Yeah.
and because that's the day on which Jesus was raised from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
So, Trevor, what about the Sabbath then?
Yeah, what about the Sabbath? Yeah, the Sabbath, that whole law and the dedication of that day was done away with.
Okay.
When Jesus died on the cross. In fact, there's a passage over in Colossians that talks
Great
about
minds
this.
running in the same rut.
Are you going there?
Go ahead.
You can go ahead if you want. That's fine.
Well, it's Colossians 2, verses 13 through 17, but if
Mm-hmm.
you want to go into that, you go right ahead.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
It works. All right. Colossians 2, beginning at verse 13. And you being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, He has made alive together with Him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Having disarmed principalities and powers, He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them in it. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival, or a new moon, or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he took those things out of the way, nailed it to the cross, wiped it out.
Wiped it out.
Okay, now, those things among the things that are mentioned that Jesus took out of the way.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, going back to verse 14, the summary of it is the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever that handwriting of requirements was, when Jesus died on the cross, He took that out of the way.
Yeah,
He wiped it out, just like you erase a chalkboard.
that's right.
Okay, all right, then that handwriting of requirements includes judging in food or in drink. So, can we eat unclean foods now, Trevor?
I do. Yeah.
You mean
can.
you eat catfish?
I eat catfish and pork and
Pork also?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm wild.
All right. Because those laws were done away with when
Absolutely.
Christ died on the cross.
Yeah.
The laws concerning foods that could and could not be eaten,
Yeah.
which were very specific under the Old Testament. But it also mentions festivals, new moons, and Sabbaths.
Mm-hmm.
I made a notation. There are a couple of Old Testament chapters that go through, in Leviticus chapter 23, is a list of the various feast days of the Jews. And you can read all about those in Leviticus chapter 23. Those are the festivals that the Apostle Paul is referring to here in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16. And then in Numbers, and I'm not going to go into all of this, it would be a very lengthy and boring study. Numbers chapters 28 and 29 is a list. By the way, if you want to help yourself fall asleep some night, then read through Numbers chapters 28 and 29 and see if you can count how many animals were sacrificed in 1 year, even apart from the sacrifices for sins. It's amazing, by the way, the number of animals. And that's what is listed in Numbers chapters 28 and 29. And it begins with the daily sacrifices. And that was a lamb in the morning and a lamb in the evening. Mm-hmm. And then on the Sabbaths, it doubled it. There were 2 lambs in the morning, 2 lambs in the evening. And then the new moon. Well, see, he mentions here in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, or new moon, or Sabbath. Yeah. And then he goes through all of the feast days that the Jews, there were a total of 7 different festivals, 3 of them that all the Jewish males were required to attend. And they're all listed in Leviticus chapter 23, but then the various sacrifices that not only involved the festivals, but also involved the Sabbath, and also involved every day of the week, and also involve the new moon. They're all mentioned in Numbers chapters 28 and 29. So it's all that round of festivals, feast days, new moons, and Sabbaths. And Paul said that was just, when Jesus died on the cross, that was done away with. We don't keep the Sabbath. We don't keep the festivals of the Jews. Those feast days that the Jews, such as the Feast of Trumpets. That's a feast day of the Jews. Those are things that are not a part of our worship and service today. We don't keep those as a part of our service to God today because when Christ died on the cross, He wiped them out of the way. And that includes the Sabbath.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, Trevor, let's see if we can summarize. What does the Sabbath mean to you?
Nothing really.
Okay.
Anymore, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you were a Jew, it would be a national holiday.
Well, yeah.
Just like the 4th of July
Yeah.
is a national holiday for an American.
Right.
Or for a Canadian, the 1st of July
Right.
is a national holiday. And so if I were a Jew, then that would be a holiday that I would remember as a part of my heritage as a Jew.
Yeah.
But would it be something that I would be required to observe in order to please God?
No, it has no bearing on your salvation. And,
Okay.
and it should not be used in that way.
Right,
as well.
and that's the key,
Yeah.
isn't it? That
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with, if you want to rest on Saturday, that's your business. Okay,
Yeah.
But don't bind that as something that people must do in order to serve God.
Or be doing it in such a way that your conscience, you're doing it for your own conscience, that you're trying to please God, as you said, by doing that. That doesn't work either. And I was thinking of Galatians chapter 5, actually,
Go right ahead.
where Paul talks about this very idea of trying to take those things from the old law and be justified before God by practicing those things. Paul says you cannot do that. In verse, now specifically he's talking about circumcision in the text, which was part of the old law. He says in verse 2, indeed I, Paul, I'm in Galatians 5:2, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, that would have been in accordance with the old law, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised, he's a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by law. You have fallen from grace. And so right there is an important point, I think, to make, that if we're, in our minds, in our hearts, if we're practicing the Sabbath and we're ceasing, trying to justify ourselves before God or trying to be found righteous before God by doing that act, then he says you've actually fallen from grace.
All right.
You're trying to practice that old law, which, as we've already seen there in Colossians, it's wiped away.
Taken out of the way, nailed
There
to
you
the
go.
cross. All right. Okay, Trevor, thank you. So I'm going to just a real brief summary. So we don't keep the Sabbath as a religious holy day.
Right.
Christians assemble on the first day of the week, not for the purpose of remembering that Israel was delivered from Egyptian bondage,
Right.
but for the purpose of remembering that Jesus died on the cross, was buried, and was raised again the third day for our salvation. That's what we come together to do every first day of the week.
That's right.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for watching the program this evening, and we hope you'll watch again next time and let us know what your questions are. Trevor, anything you'd like to add before we close?
I think that's good. And just as a reminder, when you submit questions, it's confidential. We're not going to mention your name, as you've probably already noticed on the program. So feel free to submit some questions. We'd love to have them. Thanks
for mentioning that, Trevor. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching Search the Scriptures. If you have a Bible question or comment, you may call 870-321-5746, email Keith Sharp at suddenlink.net, or write Keith Sharp at P.O. Box 263, Mountain Home, Arkansas 72654. And your question will be answered on the air. Be sure to watch next week at the same time for another edition of Search the Scriptures. Until then, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.